things go wrong and we want to assess what the police officer did, training seems to be at the crux of that conversation.
We do so little and expect so much. And if the officer fails, it's on the officer. We need to change what we're doing to match the expectations that society has of that officer.
Life gets in the way, and then before they know it, their skills have degraded to a point where we get to where we're talking about of acting out of fear because they don't have confidence in their ability.
How long y'all gotta hold him down?
Why would you do drugs, kids? It ain't about drugs, bro. Y'all understand that?
Y'all don't gotta put y'all right.
He is human, bro. He's
His nose.
When I watched the video of his murder, every day, African Americans and other people of color live in fear of arrest. It ain't about film, bro. Let's get about blood. Okay, what
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to our web series, our Village in Action web series. Where do we go from here? We do have a very special night. Super excited to have a few officers, police officers with us tonight. Many of you probably know our police officers have been working around the clock. And so to just get police officers on the call tonight is just super exciting. Those that we have on the call have worked out with other team members about, taking off and, working out with their schedules to make sure they could be here tonight. So we're just super excited to have them. We just were in the green room, just cutting up about just all the things that have been going on, how they have been maintaining peace, sanctity. So we're just super excited to talk to guests tonight. I'm gonna pull up the questions that I have. I wanna kind of get into questions with just our first officer. Ivan, if you could just pull that screen down just for a second. And those who are joining us for the first time tonight, please utilize the chat box. If you do have questions that you'd like to ask our police officers, we'd love you to do that. Also, if tonight is your first night joining us, please put your email address in the chat box. Want to include you on any future courses we have going out, that will be great. If you're also joining the call and I may have forgotten to place your mic on mute, please place your mic on mute so that we don't interrupt some of the questions and answers our guests tonight. Okay, Antoine, can you hear me? Is your mic turned on?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Antoine, great to have you tonight, sir. Really appreciate you. And I know we're on a crunch time. I know I got to get you back. First of all, big shout out to your wife. Today's her birthday. So I do appreciate the sacrifice, you being here with us. But then secondly, I know that you have been working around the clock. You've had very little sleep and you've been fighting on the front lines. And so I'm just curious, number one, what's the pulse in Washington, D.C.? This is our nation's capital. We've seen some amazing things like Mayor Muriel Bowser, put Black Lives Matter on 16th Street leading up to the White House. There have been a lot of things going on. And so for our viewers tonight who may not be in Washington, D.C., and our viewers tonight who have not made it to a protest, right? What's a sense of
So what I've noticed is I've noticed a lot of solidarity. Well, a lot of people are just coming together. And unfortunately, there are some groups that are trying to take away from what people are trying to protest. They're trying to just make it, they're just trying to make it about George Floyd, which has been upsetting me from the start. It's more than just George Floyd. It's about our rights, about the injustices that we've been through for years. And people have been trying to take it away from that, just make it about him and just cause the rioting, and put it on like Black Lives Matter, which is not the case. But everybody's been coming together. From the protests that I've seen, people have been peaceful. They've been listening. They've actually been engaging. They want to talk. They want to understand. They want to know what the next steps are, what things we can do to kind of just make this better for everyone.
As a detective in Washington, D.C., can you talk a little bit about what your interactions have been with protests, right? Because we see all over the news, people are fighting, there's tear gas, there's rubber bullets, right? What has been your interaction and maybe some of your colleagues with protesters?
Yeah, so mine are minimal. I haven't been out as much, only because, like you said, I'm a detective. So the caseload that I work on, it doesn't bring me in the field too much. But from colleagues, the first nights were rough, just because of, like I said, there were a lot of groups involved, and some of the groups involved didn't want to make it easy. They wanted to start a lot of the looting. They wanted to become violent. Like I said, just kind of take away from what was going on. But some officers, like I said,
you know how you like to.
Some officers they said it's been rough, but it's calmed down now. Officers are having no issues really going out there. All they're doing is really just guarding certain areas and just trying to make sure that certain groups don't clash.
Yeah, talk about that. Have you seen a clash yet? Because I think that there's a huge job for officers to make sure that there's no clash. Have you seen that?
Yes. So yeah, they're the people that are the agitators who will just kind of come in and start talking about white power and start calling people the N-word, and some of them will get arrested because they're trying. What they're doing is trying to incite violence and try to kind of just start people up. But there are people who have been or who do go in to certain protests and just try to counter protest and kind of get people riled up.
Yeah. And this last question, I really kind of want to just talk about just your Black male identity. And while I do that, if I can have Donald get ready to come on, because he's going to be our next guest. And if you could just talk about how this has impacted you as a Black man, right? You're an officer, but you're also a Black man. Have you had to find ways to cope with this? And if so, in what ways are you coping? How are you pouring back into yourself?
So yeah, like you said, I am an officer, but however, I am a Black man first. It will always be the case, no matter what position I'm in. It's taken a toll, of course, and I'm actually happy to see a lot of the reforms that are happening now. As far as being able to kind of cope with it, not yet. This is probably one of my first days off in about 3 weeks. When we were working 12-hour shifts, and that was minimum. So sometimes we would be there for 18 hours and we were working 7 days a week. So when I would come home, I would just really just go to sleep. So I haven't really had the time to actually cope with everything going on, just because work has been so crazy. But actually, that's one of the things that I've actually kind of been fighting for too. I have suggested that a lot of officers need to start going to EAP, which is kind of like the psychologist, just to help, because with the times and everything, with not getting the sleep that you need, with working so much, you're not going to be able to cope with it on your own, not right away. So I'm taking this time now because I'm off for my wife's birthday now. I'm taking these couple days off just to kind of calm down, to bring the mood down and just understand, or help me understand, what's going on and how these changes are going to affect, myself, my family, everything that's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, and last question, and I have to ask you this: are there moments that you're out in the I saw a video the other day of a black male cop, and they were chanting, they were singing, they were protesting, and someone had a video, a close-up video of him singing along, right?
Yeah.
Do you ever have these moments as a Black man when you're seeing the protests and you're like, I wish I could be out there, I wish I could be protesting, right? You ever have those moments?
Man, I tell my I tell my wife every day I see her. I was like, listen, if I didn't have to work, and if they, you know, I'll be out there too, because what's happening now is going to shape the future, and it needs to happen. And though I am a part of it, and people see me as on the wrong side, which I don't think is ever the best thing to see me as, but I wish that I can actually be a part of it. But I'm contributing and doing things in other ways. So if I'm not there physically, I'm making sure that my presence is being known.
Yeah, yeah. Well, from one Black man to another Black man, stay strong, brother. I appreciate all the work that you do. I think your profession, not only is it tough, but you're faced with a lot of pressures, right?
Yeah.
So stay strong. We do appreciate the work you do in the field. Say happy birthday to your wife.
I appreciate you. Thank you, guys.
Yep, take care. Ivan, if you would go ahead and load the second video, I'd like to show that we bring Donald on to ask some questions.
Do you really understand what you gonna do there? Do you really understand? Hey, what are you about to do there? Hey, what are you about to do there? Hey, what are you about to do there? What are you about to do there? What are you about to do there? Hey, hey, what are you about to do there? I'm standing here right on the He right there. He right there. He right there. What am I doing? He right there. Hey, he right there.
If you're just joining us, we have been talking for the last few minutes about the police and how Black men have been handling all of the things that have been taking place in our country, all of the racial unrest. And that video was a young Black man, and if you could not hear him, he was saying clearly, "You should be standing here with me." That young Black man was faced against a Black male police officer saying, "You should be standing here with me." I touched on that a little bit with Antoine as he jumped off, but Donald, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, place yourself in the shoes of the officer who was receiving this message from the young Black man who was probably half his age, saying, "This is where you should be. You should be standing here with me." I'd like you to comment on that.
I think the hardest part just watching that video is even if, like me personally, if I was in the shoes, I want to say, look, I am with you. I'm there with you. I feel what you're feeling. I've experienced what you've experienced. If you've dealt with racism, I don't know many Black people who haven't dealt with racism at some particular point in their life. But there's so much anger and frustration that they don't really know where to place it, and it's been taken out on every officer they see. So if I'm trying to relate to him and talk to him man to man and say, "Hey, I understand, I'm with you, even though I'm doing my job to support my family, I'm still being equally as affected as you." But they don't take the time to hear an officer's perspective or say or hear that we're there with them, because they're just trying to keep the tension going for whatever, and it's disheartening a little bit, because I've tried to do the same in my own community, and you'll have some solidarity for the most part and people understand, but then there's always that different type of crowd who has different agendas and motives and what they're doing to take away from the actual cause.
Right. Detective Antoine did mention that different kind of crowds
Mhm.
Donald, briefly, if you can just, as a deputy sheriff in Winchester, Virginia, so you're probably 70 miles or so from Washington, D.C. Curious tonight to know, what is the pulse? How different is it from what Antoine mentioned he was in D.C., what you've seen on the news? What's different in Winchester, Virginia?
I think what's different, and it kind of, because I have family that's, my mother's side of family's from D.C., so I have a somewhat of a pulse of what D.C. is doing, just from family living there, but I'm born and raised in Winchester, Virginia, so that's where I know mostly what's going on, and people in Winchester, I think we've dealt with it, the racism maybe more extreme because in Winchester it's surrounded by Frederick County, which is a predominantly white county. There's minorities here and there, but as a whole, there's certain parts in this county where people know you better not go there by yourself. It's almost like watching a movie. Don't go there. Don't take that dark road. Unless you got somebody with you, because there's still that stigma here in this area that there's still a lot of races that proudly exhibit the racism. Some places you got the undercover racists, but here they have more courage than they used to, as far as letting you know that, hey, this is what we stand for. And before I forget, just to touch on the whole different agenda and related to the protest,
Mm-hmm.
and I know it's another question, but it just goes to show that we have people who still proudly walk around with the Confederate flag. We had a guy who had a Confederate flag on his pickup truck. He drove right in the middle of the protest, to get people riled up. And I thank God, and I'm proud of Winchester for not letting him be a distraction to what the cause was and what they were trying to do. They just remained still, and the other officers were able to get him out of the area and keep the movement going. So that's just talking about the agendas. That's something that we've dealt with here.
Yeah, and that is unfortunate. I do want to dive in really quickly, Donald, to we had a guest speaker on Tuesday, a professor of sociology who was a former police officer. He talked about how the training that he had received, the recruitment, the hiring process. And I think a lot of that information, Donald, is not information that most citizens know about, right? So we question, what is this recruitment process like? What is the hiring process like? So if you could answer just that piece, and then I want to kind of get into the training after that.
Sure. I think for the most part, every agency is going to have their own process. I've applied for big agencies in Northern Virginia. I've applied for small, little teeny departments, and the hiring process is going to be a lot different based on the resources that you have. A lot of times, small departments don't have the extra manpower or resources to do a thorough background, like some of the bigger agencies do, where, they have multiple officers that's working on one applicant, for example. So I think they get stretched thin at the small departments as far as maybe not as going in detail with your background as they should. And a lot of it could be because they're short staffed and they're just trying to get people hired and on the road because they're hurting for manpower. That's a concern of mine as well, because we're losing manpower over this. A lot of people getting frustrated and leaving. So are they going to be trying to fill those positions rapidly without doing the due diligence in the background? So just from the beginning, so you understand. So when you apply, just my own personal experience, and this is even in small departments, you basically, there's a written test for some departments where you have to pass a written test and then a physical agility test before you even get considered for an interview. So I've experienced that part to start a process. But even more recently, they start with the interviews. It's usually a 3-step process with interviews. It starts with just a one-on-one with the recruiter who's recruiting you. If he feels like you could be an asset to the department, then he'll include another supervisor, and then the 3rd step would be a panel interview with a lot of the command staff, captains, sometimes a sheriff, lieutenants. So there is an interview stepping scale, I guess you can say. If you make it through the interview, then you got the background checks and all that to see what your background's like. They'll go talk to your teachers, your neighbors, like just to see what kind of person you are in general. And I think they can find out a lot about a person's character that way if they can be calm under pressure. If you talk to somebody's teacher and they say, well, he's always on edge, well, that might be a little concerning, because if he's on edge in school, how's he not going to be on edge at a hot call? So
Yeah.
so the backgrounds are pretty thorough with that as far as that goes. And then after that, you have a polygraph, which is anything in your past that might disqualify you from being law enforcement. They want to get those answers, whether it's physical abuse, physical assaults, so that's how they kind of weed through some of the people who have a violent past or have known to act out. Polygraph can eliminate some of that, but again, there's things that slip through the cracks that people don't always catch, and that's where we're running into the problems now. We're getting those slipping through the cracks who know how to work the system, I guess you could say.
So it doesn't sound like the process is watered down. I mean, you're talking about a polygraph, you're talking about a written test. And is this written test an all-day exam? Is it a 30 question?
It's about 3 hours. It's about a 3-hour exam, and it's basically just testing common knowledge. It's something that anybody off the street can take. You don't ever have to study for it. It's just trying to see where your mindset is with certain things. Like, they'll give you scenarios. If you responded to this situation, what would you do? So it's and that's why it takes so long, because a lot of it's just writing down an answer that might be a paragraph long, because they want to see what your response is going to be. But it's not watered down at all. It's not a watered down process. It's very thorough, actually. Most agencies, it's going to take about 3 to 6 months to get that final qualifying offer, and then you're placed on probationary period too, just to make sure that if there is something that they missed, it usually exhibits itself in probation. So,
Donald, let's talk about the training just for a second. In the last call, the professor mentioned that the training, it was more like you're going into a war zone, right? They train you to go find bad people because you receive ribbons, you receive awards, you receive promotions, you receive advances for the more bad people that you find, the more bad people that you lock up. Is there any truth to that?
Not here, no. I've never, or even in the other agencies. I have a lot of friends as officers in various departments, and I've never heard anybody mention, training almost like a Marine, where you're trained to go out and get the worst of the worst. The training here locally, we base it on the community needs. If there's certain issues that we're having a problem with, we tailor our training around the best approach to it. As far as unity, not putting the law enforcement aside, we're not going in there, knocking heads, but how can we de-escalate a problem without having it to go to that kind of level? We're trying.
That's a great question. I want to pose this question to you that came from the chat box. And if you have some questions tonight, please, guest participants, please add those to the box. I want to be able to share as many as I possibly can. But dealing with the training, Donald, one question from the chat box. Say, given the numerous videos we've seen where the officers resort to violence without trying to de-escalate, you just mentioned that word, de-escalation. Is there something within the training that you receive that might explain the inability to de-escalate and then the swiftness to move to police brutality?
I don't think there's anything to me, when I watch those videos, it's more, I see officers in fear for whatever reason. They're not acting out on training, because training, it's always communication first. Your presence, then your communication. There's some, and a lot of officers taking verbal judo classes, just because if you can communicate with somebody verbally, a lot of times it brings people down without even having to go to another level. But when I see officers reacting so quickly and doing something on impulse, it's like a stigma that they have, like, if I don't do this, I'm gonna end up hurt. And a lot of times that's probably not the case, but it's a fear mentality right now. The officers are especially now with all the violence going on, they're more, I guess you'd say, paranoid than ever before. So but there is no training, that says go from here to that point without any kind of physical threat. If there's a physical threat for harming me, then that's when you want to go hands-on, or that's when you want to de-escalate, or keep anybody else out of harm. You know, they have to exhibit the ability to hurt somebody or even threats.
This is the first night that we've had Black officers who were in the current line of duty. We had some retired police officers a couple of weeks back. So just want to say thank you for all the work that you do, Donald, but just also want to know from the identity as a Black man, how this has impacted you in your own personal life, how it impacts you with family, how it impacts you with friends. You and I spoke earlier, you're active in your church, you're a musician, right?
Right.
Church, right? How has your role, your career, your profession impacted you on a daily basis?
It took a toll on me recently, as far as this week, like, and I do a lot of praying to God to give me the strength and the wisdom to handle certain situations without, just doing it without even thinking. So I think I try so hard to block out certain things. Eventually it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs to where it's like I can't take it anymore. And I had to, and I'm usually on Facebook a lot, communicating with family or friends, and I just completely distanced myself from social media, because it got to the point to where it really did something to me mentally to watch those videos or see the comments and see people's different views and the hate towards law enforcement. And it's just, it really, if I were to get sucked into that, it would be completely discouraging and make me want to probably do something else. So you have to learn to deal with it in your own way. Not everybody is going to be, where they're praying to God. They might have whether it's music, whether it's going out somewhere, going to friends. I've been to my wife a lot, as far as things that's going on. So, I mean, you have to talk. That's the main thing. And that's what I've learned to do. And my wife is completely supportive and understanding, and she's willing to listen. And my wife is white. So, there's that dynamic. I got all my kids are biracial. So that aspect of it's very concerning to me, because my biracial kids can see what's going on. I have a 15-year-old who's very aware of what's going on. And she was actually involved in the protest here in Winchester that I was out there protecting people from. She was actually in it, because she's a minority. So, that part kind of really hits home to me. Even though I'm Black, I'm more concerned about my kids, because I know I can handle certain things to a certain level, but my kids don't, I don't want them being. So that's another aspect of just being Black and having a biracial family and law enforcement. It's a tough combination sometimes.
Yeah. So how have you handled those conversations in your house, right? Biracial children, your wife is white, you're an African-American male, right? And so what are those dinner table conversations like, those late night, early morning conversations with your family before you leave the house?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, before I leave the house every morning, it's great that my wife and my daughter will always make sure to give me a hug and kiss and say be safe. Like, it's so that gives me the strength to get out there every day and do what I got to do. But as far as conversations are concerned, they're very honest and upfront about what they feel, or if they have questions, they're not going to hesitate to ask them. So they're paying attention to what's going on, and they'll address certain things that they encounter. My oldest daughter, she's very light-skinned. She's blonde hair, blue eyes. So she doesn't get it as much as my other daughter, who's kind of more my complexion. And I don't know if it's just the skin color, or people don't know if she's white or Black, or if she's both. I mean, so I see different, in all my kids, I see different things going on. So,
what about your colleagues? Because you mentioned, just your household, biracial household, right? So now when you go to work, what has your relationship been like since all of these events have been happening with, let's just start with Black officers first, right? Then I want to talk about white officers. What is the relationship like has been with the white officers prior to these events and now? Has it changed? Has it shifted? Talk about that for a minute.
With the white officers, it really hasn't changed. I can kind of tell who has a genuine care for things that are going on, or a genuine care for me as a person. You can kind of tell that there's some who just tolerate you because you're wearing a badge too, and you're fighting the same crime. But there's also some who really are trying to make that difference. it's a good question you asked me, because I actually had two people reach out to me last week. One is a supervisor at another agency, and one is a Virginia State Trooper, to say, hey, what is your view on the Black Lives Matter movement? Like, how do you feel? Why do you feel this way if you do feel this way? So they're asking genuine questions, and these are people who I know personally, that they have a genuine care for me as a Black man and other Black people. So they don't really get into the law enforcement side of it. They just want to know, they want to understand more of why things are happening and why people feel a certain way in my embrace. So
Yeah. What about the Black officers, right? You know, is there some sort of like secret meeting that happens after work, before work? You know, how are the Black officers coping with everything that's happening, and then how are you being a support to one another?
I haven't noticed anything as far as a different relationship with the Black officers. I know there's not as many here as it is like down in DC or the bigger cities, but we have a few, and there's certain things that we can, I guess, have conversations about that that you might not be able to say to a white officer, because you don't want them to take it the wrong way or be offended or whatever. But it's more so just consoling each other and trying to help each other get through certain things. So there is a unity between Black officers here, though. I mean, it's definitely, we understand that we're all in this together, but also along with that, the white officers are trying to, it's almost like they're going above and beyond to make sure that that you're cared for and that you're part of this department, or that so sometimes it's disingenuous. You can kind of tell if they're just trying to smooth it over, or whether they really care. So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah. We have a parole officer that I want to bring on here in a few minutes, so I want him to get ready. But I do have a question, Donald, about the initiatives at work. If people have been watching the news, there's all these diversity statements that major companies and corporations are making. Starbucks, Nordstrom's, Dunkin' Donuts, you name it, there's going to be some diversity statement.
Right.
Black Lives Matters, right?
Right.
Has there been any initiative or any public statement at work in support of Black officers at your job?
Well, last night we had a conference that was actually with my sheriff and the major, the chief deputy. They're both white. And we basically sat down with some other people in the community of different races, and he took the stance like, I'm just as peed off as you are about all this stuff. So he has no tolerance for it in his office. So he has taken that stance that it won't be tolerated or accepted here. The only thing we didn't have in that meeting was the other local agencies, to see if they have any kind of stance on what's going on. But we did get a good feedback from some of the people in the community that were there in that meeting, and it's almost like everybody understands enough is enough, and we're coming together as one, as the highest person as a sheriff to just a regular citizen, to say, hey, enough is enough. What can we do next? So that's my sheriff's stance on it. He's trying to figure out ways to start nipping things in the bud.
Yeah, to talk about those conversations, the enough is enough conversation. We want to do more, right? Because there's been so much language and rhetoric around. We got to stop. This is prior to George Floyd, prior to Breonna Taylor, prior to Ahmaud Arbery, right? We have been facing this injustice for years, right?
Right.
And so, What do you think is this? This seems to be different, right? What we are experiencing and feeling just seems to be different. So
Absolutely.
what you think? What's in the mind of maybe those you're working with as to what they want to do different?
Well, the first thing my sheriff said right after the George Floyd incident happened and the protest was starting is he was very frustrated because we've been trying so hard to move forward, bridging gaps in the community and uniting with the community, and then some officer from across the country just kind of makes us take 10 steps back from everything we worked towards for the last several years. So he was very agitated by that, but also just to hit on your question too, it's more so the energy that's involved right now, like you were saying, with the corporations and everybody getting involved in the movement. It's like a domino effect. And I watch SportsCenter every day. I'm a huge sports fan. I see all these sports owners and hit of different sports teams saying I need to do better, hold myself more accountable for
Yeah.
diversity in the organization. So I
Even
think it's just
Roger Goodell, right, with the NFL
right,
the commissioner who made tomorrow
right.
Juneteenth. He gave it his staff, employees, players Juneteenth off as a national paid holiday, right?
Exactly.
So
So I feel like that helps other people be more comfortable to also come in and support. It's almost like they didn't want to be the first person, but now that everybody's speaking out, I do feel this way and I support you. So it's helping the uncomfortable people be more comfortable to speak about the issues.
yeah, that's really good. Stay right there, Donald. Ray, can you hear me? Is your mic unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, Ray Smith, great to have you on the call tonight. Ray, I know that your profession is different than Antoine and different than Donald, but I think there's a great connection and a tie here I want to explore just for a few minutes. Ray, you're a federal probation parole officer. You work closely with law enforcement entities. You visit homes. You're in the community with police officers. You mentioned it earlier that there's this negative light that the community has, rightfully so because of all the things we see on the media, right? Tons of bad things. But your office, your agency, talk a little bit about what you all are working on to try to be the bridge between the community and the police officers.
Okay. Well, working for the agency that I currently work for, our main goal is basically to promote public safety, to reduce recidivism in the community, and the fair administration of justice. So we take a more of a community interaction / policing to accomplish that goal. One of the ways we do that is by having partnerships with local law enforcement, which happens to be like MPD and other federal law enforcement entities. One of those things we do is we're in the community. So if there's something like National Night Out, which is a national program throughout the United States where the influence of police officers throughout the nation are pretty much out. It's one way that they're actually showing that not all cops are bad cops. We're involved with that. But from my agency standpoint, we do home visits, and we actually partner with the local MPD office to make sure that those home visits go well, and to also show that the police officers are there to protect you, but at the same time, they're not always there to arrest you either. So we actually educate our clients and their families in the community on what the purpose of that visit is for, and basically so they can actually put a face to an officer's name as well.
Yeah, but how hard is that, especially with the climate that we're in today, right? With all of the things that we see on the media, it just seems like everything is pointed towards the Black community. How hard is your role in your position in this partnership with police officers?
I would say it's we wear many hats, because not only are we supposed to enforce the law, but we're also supposed to be a social worker. We're supposed to be a counselor, as well as a mediator for the actual clients and their families, because we deal with the clients deal with a lot of things such as mental health, they deal with substance abuse, they deal with domestic violence. So it's a ton of things that they deal with, and they have also a set of parole or probation conditions that they must follow as well to make sure that they don't go back into the system. So you put all of that, together, you have a ton of mitigating factors that, not only is the individual that's on supervision dealing with, but they also have to interact with, law enforcement officers to accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier about recidivism, and I think that's a very interesting point, and I need to bring on, have another show about recidivism, Ray. But talk about recidivism versus this this prison pipeline that is so full of Black and brown, the Black and brown population, right? It just seems like, because in order for the institution to remain funded, there needs to be more people in jail. The less people in jail, these institutions aren't funded as heavily. So talk about the work you do within recidivism to keep people from going back. What resources are out there? How much money are you putting into the community, into the lives of people who have been in the system and now are out?
Well, my agency is a little different because we're a federal agency. We receive a lot of funds from the federal government. So we're able to actually provide a lot of resources.
Join the meeting.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
All right, so we're able to provide a lot of resources to the community to make sure that these individuals that are currently on supervision don't go back into the system. We do something called a pre-sentence investigation report, where we're actually looking at the history of those individuals that are on supervision. We need to know basically what their educational level is. We need to understand, their family dynamics. If there's, been any traumatic events that have gone on in their life. So those are probably the source that we use to decide what assessments and tools are needed to make sure that these individuals don't recidivize. But before you even get to that, you still have to go from the community standpoint of the family dynamic. You have to make sure that there's, a support system for which these individuals can go to, so they don't have to turn to the streets or turn to illegal activity to accomplish whatever it is they need to accomplish. Once you do that, you've already attacked that pipeline that's actually, going to prevent them from going to jail, but actually is going to allow them to go to school and to become, law-abiding citizens later. But as far as resources, the main thing is education. I would say from my standpoint, looking at individuals that are currently in supervision, a lot of the individuals have not matriculated through high school or on to other trades such as, construction or any type of plumbing, anything of that nature. So you have to really start with the family dynamic and make sure that you get a holistic approach from mama, grandmother, father, son. All those people have to be involved with that to make sure that this pipeline does not, lead to jail, but actually to making them law-abiding and professional citizens.
Okay, talk again briefly about the partnership you have. You mentioned Night Out. Tell me more about that. You pair up with police officers and you go into the community, you help the community understand that the role of a police officer, right, is not maybe what they think it is.
Well, actually, that's a police program, the National Night Out. Okay. But local law enforcement participate in that actual thing, but it's actually a police-funded program where they're in the community. So you'll see a ton of police officers in different jurisdictions, no matter where you are, and they're out and they're doing festivals, they're providing games, food, music, and just conversation with the community. So that happens, I believe it happens in August every year. I don't remember exactly what date, but it's normally in August. There's something called All Hands on Deck, where basically throughout the United States, a ton of law enforcement officers are actually out. Their lights, some jurisdictions have the lights flickering just to show that, their presence is in the community. What my agency does is more so it's an accountability tour is what we call it, where we actually go with MPD to the actual homes or to the community, and we show basically that there's a partnership going on and that basically we're not there to arrest them, harass them, but actually just to show the humanistic side of the police department as well as probation parole.
Yeah. Right, it's good to know that there are programs like that that are out there. I learned something new tonight. I do appreciate you sharing. Donald, I want to come back to you briefly before we close out. Donald, I think it's very important that we touch on this point and have you kind of respond to it. As a Black man, I find it hard, whether it's a white cop or a bad cop, right? It don't matter what type of cop. I just have a fear, a nervousness, anxiety, right? My own personal experiences, even though I have 3, it doesn't matter, right? How many degrees you have, you're not you aren't protected. If you're Black in America, sometimes you have it a little bit worse than others. I just want you to talk a little bit from the seat and position of a Black male police officer. How can the Black community, especially, and then the white community who is supportive of the Black community, how can we deal with this anxiety, deal with this nervousness, not have to have this notion in our mind, this misconception that the police is out to get us?
One of the things that comes first in my mind is accountability. I mean, it boils down to holding each other accountable. And you know, in the law enforcement, you know, people refer to law enforcement as being a blue line family. A lot of people don't understand what that really means, but it's basically a brotherhood where we're all out there together fighting, you know, together to keep the community safe. And sometimes I think officers get wrapped up in, they don't want to intervene or call out their brother in blue because, you know, that's your coworker or that's your friend outside of work and you don't want to get them in trouble. There's just not enough accountability holding your fellow officer that might not be doing the right thing accountable. And, you know, one thing they do train you in the academy, the very first day, is integrity. They instill integrity in your head over and over and over and over again, basically saying if you don't have integrity in this job, you don't have anything. You know, so it all starts with your character and being honest. So I'm not sure if that touched on your question at all, but that's something that we've discussed, at least here, how we can try to help the community be more comfortable and have more confidence in us. Is if we see something wrong, you know, they know that we're going to point it out and hold each other accountable. There is no favoritism. There is no good old boy system. Like, you know, and that's something that law enforcement's had forever. It's called the good old boy system, to where you can't do any wrong, and it's just going to swept underneath the rug. Where, you know, all that stuff is stopping. They're starting to dissipate quickly.
So are you starting to see now that there are police officers calling each other out? Hey man, that was wrong. You shouldn't have did that, you know, or police officers going to even file complaints against one another when they do something egregious?
I haven't seen anything in person, but what I have noticed before I got off Facebook was white officers that I knew were basically agreeing and commenting the same thing that everybody else commenting, like, yes, that officer was wrong. You know, he should have done this. So they're doing it on the social media aspect more so than in person.
Yeah.
It's they need, exactly. They need to do it in person and show that, because anybody can do it on a keyboard, you know, but to actually go to the next step and if you see something, and I work in an area where most of the guys I work with, they're all good guys. I don't question anybody's integrity here. So I really haven't seen or been involved in a situation where I had to hold anybody accountable for something negative they were doing. But they do know that I'm the first person that will. Like, I'm not. They know I'll speak out in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So.
Hey Don, a couple of questions from the chat box. If you've watched the news recently, you've seen CEOs and managers and directors get fired for saying things that were racist. Right? And I'm talking about top-notch corporations asked to resign. I have not quite seen if there's a system like that in place within the police officers. If there is a police officer who is found to be racist or say something racially inflammatory, whether it be online or whether it be in person, what type of thing is done in-house? I mean, why isn't the system similar to if somebody at a corporation says something racially inflammatory, they're fired? I haven't seen that in the police system.
It's kind of differentiates between if you work for a sheriff's office as compared to the police department. Because like with the police department, if you get fired, you got the city council and everybody that you can file grievance with. The sheriff's office is kind of the same, but the sheriff doesn't really have to have any particular reason to terminate you. You know, if he sees that you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing or being racist, he can just say, you know, turn in your badge and that's it. Police department, you kind of got to take extra steps. But
it's the union, right? They're protected by the union.
Somewhat, yeah. But the way I see it now is every agency realizes we're in a crisis and we have to take action right now. So those guys who are known to be racist or have made racist comments or have had complaints, even complaints, they're being investigated a lot more and more thoroughly than before because they realize that it's a growing issue and all the attention is on it right now. So it is something that's being pointed out more, and there's people looking more. There's people trying to pick apart and see if this person's racist, that person's racist, and they are addressing it. They are. I've known a lot of guys that's turning in the badge, and I don't know if it's because they knew they don't agree with all this stuff going on, and they don't, who knows? But we are losing a lot of officers, and some of them are probably those that are racist.
But isn't that what it's going to take, though, Donald?
Yeah.
People like you in your position to approach an officer who has been inflammatory, who has been racist, and to encourage, hey, man, this is not the field for you. Turn in your badge, right? There needs to be some sort of process, because if this same thing happened in all of these other professions, all these other industries, and people can say something inflammatory on social media and lose their job tomorrow,
right?
The process should be similar, right? So talk about that. Yeah, go ahead.
It should definitely be similar, and I think in this field, in this career, a fear of retaliation is something that you hear a lot. Like if you're addressing somebody who has those issues of discrimination or whatever, depending on their status in the department, if it's a supervisor, then you're instantly thinking, okay, if I were to report him and nothing gets done as far as his actions and any kind of disciplinary action, then what's going to happen to me? Because he knows that I, addressed the issue with him and also command staff, and then it becomes, well, is my career safe? Are they going to be out to get me next? So the retaliation thing, especially for me as a black officer, that's something I think about, but I don't let it, hold me back from doing what's right. It all comes down to integrity again and holding people accountable without that fear of retaliation. But that is something that officers do actually feel is retaliation or fear of retaliation.
And I'm imagining as a black officer, because as a black officer, there's not a lot in your profession compared to white officers, right? And so when you talk about turning somebody in or reporting somebody, that fear of retaliation, right? Is there not an anonymous way?
There is, and it's funny because I've had experience before to where I've had to address something like that with my immediate supervisor. And I remember even asking in my letter to the command staff not to first of all, not put my name in it, because I didn't, again, that fear of retaliation. Sure. But it still happened anyways. So they still told him who it was and exactly what my concern was. And I did feel some type of retaliation after that. And my relationship with him deteriorated, and the whole, it was just like all the world against me, because I stepped out and tried to speak up for myself to say, hey, I'm feeling discrimination right now, and I was the only black officer in the department. So that alone, was kind of it was kind of tough, and I didn't think about when I reported him, like, I'm the only black officer here. If people have my back, I don't know, because I'm always just trying to do the right thing, and then sometimes it does backfire depending on where you're at.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, there was a question from the chat, this good old boy mentality. I'm glad that you brought that up, Donald. It's starting to lessen in this sense that we see it more prevalent in the news, right? With the recent resigning of the Buffalo and Atlanta, both cities, right? The chief of police, I believe, resigned, right? Do you think that is part of the reason why you sense that the good old boy mentality is lessening, or is there something else that has brought you to that conclusion?
Well, it's just something I've seen firsthand, just from local other agencies across this region of Virginia, that have came from Northern Virginia, and they're now the top guy here at a department that's been, I guess you can say, in the past always has been a one race department. And he basically came in and started making changes from day one, and said, and he lost a lot of deputies because of his mentality was, we need to clean up the people who are not doing what they're supposed to do. And he kind of got rid of the good old boy system. So I've actually witnessed that person, beforehand. So it's not that, I'm thinking this happened. I've seen it happen in an area I never thought it would happen.
As a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve mankind, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation, and the peaceful against violence or disorder, and to respect the constitutional rights of all men to liberty, equality, and justice. I will keep my private life unsullied as an example to all, maintain courageous calm in the face of danger, scorn, or ridicule, develop self-restraint, and be constantly mindful of the welfare of others. Honest in thought and deed in both my personal and official life, I will be exemplary in obeying the laws of the land and the regulations of my department. Whatever I see or hear of a confidential nature or that is confided to me in my official capacity will be kept ever secret unless revelation is necessary in the performance of my duty. I will never act officiously or permit personal feelings, prejudices, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. With no compromise for crime and with a relentless prosecution of criminals, I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately without fear or favor, malice or ill will, never employing unnecessary force or violence, and never accepting gratuities. I recognize the badge in my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as a public trust to be held so long as I am true to the ethics of police service. I will constantly strive to achieve these objectives and ideals, dedicating myself before God and to my chosen profession, law enforcement. Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Tillman. And today, on a little bit of a more somber note, I want to talk to you guys about the incident that occurred yesterday in Minneapolis involving George Floyd. What I just read to you guys was a law enforcement code of ethics. And what you don't realize is that most police officers across the country, when they graduate the police academy, we recite that code of ethics. It's ingrained in us. We memorize it, and we also make sure we take it to heart because we have to know what we accept to do as this job. And the reason I read that law enforcement code of ethics to you right now is because I want you guys to know what I signed up for. The reason why I do what I do. The reason why I became a police officer is to protect people. It's to help people. It's to save people in their most dire need. What I did not sign up to do is I did not sign up to act immorally or unethically or take somebody's life who didn't deserve to die. And what we witnessed yesterday in Minneapolis was a situation in which an officer didn't care about human life. As hard as this video was to watch, what was most depressing about the video was it felt like the officer didn't have a care in the world for the subject that was on the ground.